I'm on the coast, loving life out here, Stat Pat, nice and sheltered. We are California lefties. We are California lefties talking to you about national politics, but today we'll be specifically focused on what's going on in California. And we have a
Yeah.
special guest relevant to the time when America was going through this in a very similar way. Let me
Oh,
introduce
yeah.
the one and only Professor Richard Flacks. Dick, how are you?
I'm good, and I guess I use my real name, which is fine.
Yeah.
I like my name.
Hello, Dick.
That's all I answer to. Uh, Glad to be with you here, and
Of
how
course.
you doing? Yeah.
So, Dick, why don't we open up with just a little bit about you, and if maybe we should I'll just open this with a question. Do you see like with your experience with this kind of thing that happened in the '60s? Are you having flashbacks to the '60s right now?
Uh, Actually, I prefer not to have too many flashbacks. Well, because you can get stuck there, and we can get into that a bit. But
Right.
you're referencing the fact that I was one of a group of about 50, 60 folks who gathered in Port Huron, Michigan in June of 62. It's exactly 60 years ago that we did this, I'm realizing. And
Yeah.
we at Port Huron formed an organization called Students for a Democratic Society. It became, after a couple of years, the national central organization for white student leftists. Uh, I say white because there was the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which was the leading Black civil rights student organization. We were allied with them through much of that decade. Anyway, SDS has the distinction in history, among other things, of having organized the first national protest against the war in Vietnam. And that was actually in 1965. It's more than 60 years. It's 63 years since Port Huron.
Right.
And
Yep.
65 is when we organized the March on Washington uh, in April of 65. That was the first national protest against that war. And SDS was one of the leading forces during the rest of the time, up to the end of the 60s when SDS fell apart. And I was active in the leadership of SDS, although I became a professor at the University of Chicago, sociology. Once I was a professor, I kind of backed away from being a student leader. Made sense to do that.
Right.
But continued to have a very close relationship with the SDS folks. I moved to Chicago, and so did they by coincidence. The office was there a couple of blocks from where I lived. So I had a lot of role in that in those days, what we called the New Left. I've spent a lot of my time as a writer, as a sociologist, understanding social movements if I can, trying to understand the history that I've just alluded to, where it came from, and what came of it. I'm a social psychologist by training. And so one of my interests all along has been what enables people or compels them to become politically involved. What's the consequence of participation in a student movement later in your life? I wrote a whole book called Beyond the Barricades on that subject. We studied a group of people who were leaders in the student protests here at UC Santa Barbara, where I arrived in 1969. They were indicted, the people we studied, for burning the Bank of America. None of them were convicted after a very long trial, but we studied them 10 and 20 years later, followed their lives over that long period. And that was a kind of vehicle, that book, for exploring what happened after the 60s to a lot of the social activism that characterized the 60s. And the storyline in the media was people who burned banks became bankers. We didn't think that was true at all, and we proved that in our research. there was a lot that flowed from the 60s. That's why I say I don't have a lot of flashback, because much of what we think of as key to social change, the women's movement, the environmental movement, the gay movement, the and a lot of anti-war
Yeah.
activism, and the whole movement into the Democratic Party of progressives, the rise of socialist, new socialist organization. All that's not the 60s, but the 70s, 80s, 90s, down to the present. So I'm not one who just thinks, oh, that was the great time. It was a seedbed. It was a time of planting. But I think many things have sprouted, some of which turned sour, rotted away, or died, but a lot of which I continue to believe, I want to believe, I think I can claim continues to be key to the future as well as the present. So that's my little self. I was a sociology professor at UCSB for about 50 years. Uh, Retired in 2006. I've been very active in this Santa Barbara community as a community leader on local issues. Lately, a lot on housing issues,
Hmm.
and we wrote a whole book, my wife and I, called "Making History, Making Blintzes," which is a memoir of our political and personal life in the left. I recommend it because I would love people to buy it, but more importantly, to read it. It, I think, gives some good historical uh, recollection and reflection on these times that I just referred to.
Something
I'm
to
putting
learn
a link
from.
in the I'm putting a link in the chat, and I'll put a link in the description too.
Yeah, so you were basically there from the beginning, like the initial wave of
Yes,
anti-war protests regarding Vietnam and what have you.
yes.
And so and you were literally like studying sociology at that point as well. That was what you majored in, correct?
I was very lucky to be able to be in a field like sociology where I could study the very thing that I was.
Oh, of
Yeah.
course.
And
Yeah.
and that was an interesting struggle to maintain
Right.
what we might call objectivity, but I think people have gotten something from the work that I've done as a sociologist, as well as I hope.
I think a lot of people could, especially people who are interested in politics, generally can learn a lot from the field of sociology. It tends to be overlooked in my experience. Just being a politics nerd, for lack of a better term,
Uh-huh.
it's a very useful field in terms of understanding a lot of the way that society works generally and how politics affects a lot of society.
Are you a Marshall McLuhan fan, Dick?
I wouldn't say I was a fan. I mean, I think he was the pioneer in foregrounding the media as a framework of influence, not just what was on the media, but the very nature of the media. And that's been a very, powerfully influential point of view ever since. It's a fascinating thing to foreground, and it's hard now not to think in a Marshall
Yeah.
McLuhanish way, right?
That's kind of where I was going. Yes, I think um given how right he was about, about so in film school I have two experiences educationally with you know the idea of just communication and communication technology. One was undergrad, where I studied, Marshall McLuhan was the messiah of communication studies, where
Yeah,
the medium is the message, and studying the history of communication technology, globalism, the world getting smaller, yada yada, global village, everything. And then I went to film school and studied storytelling, exclusively visual storytelling,
right.
for both television and movies. And one of the lessons, maybe the most important lesson from film school I learned, was that limitations are creativity's best friend. And I would ascribe that to McLuhan's thinking with respect to modern day media in that every communication medium is ultimately defined by its limitations if you consume it for long enough time. And Fox News is the easiest example. Fox News is consumed by its baby boomer conservative audience. It has to tell the baby boomer conservative audience exactly what it wants to hear, or they're going to OAN or Newsmax.
Yep.
And so, I always thought that should have been an add-on to my field of study because it was very closely related to sociology. I think I took a couple sociology classes that were that added to my major. It was one of those majors where you could have like an umbrella of different courses. Social psychology was one of the most important ones that I took, and it's super relevant to what's going down in Los Angeles right now. So let's talk about it. StatPat, do you have any updates for us on what's going on in LA? I mean, the last I think it was calmed down for a little while and then fired back up, but I don't know. I haven't checked in a minute.
From what I understand, it's I guess, I mean, it was never really an issue that warranted the like
military escalation.
Military, yeah, it's literally the opposite of what happened when I forget which governor it was, but when LBJ sent in the National Guard to protect protesters and whatnot from being subjugated, for lack of a better term, by a state's governor. I forget exactly. It's the opposite of that. It's Trump going in, brutalizing protesters and escalating tensions for no reason. Just it's for the military is being used to basically escort ICE as they continue their abductions of immigrants without due process, and it's just horrible optics. Nobody's for this, and he's signaling that he's going to expand it to blue cities. I think Seattle and
no, he's sending a message. He's making
yeah.
he's making an example out of Los Angeles.
But go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to ask our guest, Dick, if he thinks, where do you have any sense for where this is going? I mean, is he gonna? I mean, no, there are no limits. I mean, I've learned to expect the unexpected with this guy, so I'm starting to think in worst case scenarios. He's starting to do this in other cities, right? Like,
well, he is. Yes, he is, and I think it's one of you just alluded to is that it's going to be blue areas or relatively blue that the focus will be, and part of that is for economic reasons. The immigrant population that he is so characterizing in such rather vile ways is really a key to a lot of economic activity in many parts of the country, not just in LA or California, which it is, but in God knows South Dakota, for example. And but in those red areas, the local business folks say, "Don't take away our immigrants." Whereas, but I don't think that's not going to be the key to whatever their strategy is. Not if they have the numerical goals that they claim they have of mass deportations. No, I just heard this morning, for example, that they raided a meatpacking plant. I guess it was in Iowa. I'm not sure which state, but one of those Midwestern states. Well, a meatpacking plant is by and large, the workers there are immigrant, and they rounded up something like 75 people out of one particular plant, is what I heard this morning. Well, you can't barge into a relatively small town and a compact kind of workplace like that without a lot of resistance, opposition, and anger that spreads throughout the community. I've been watching Rachel Maddow. I kind of recommend this to people. She's on Monday nights, and what she's done is quite admirable. She each Monday she shows scenes of local protests from around the country, and much of what she's showing are smaller cities, not just blue areas, where people are coming out. And the last Monday, it was in people coming out in defense of particular undocumented workers who had been arrested by ICE in their community, but who had a long history in their community, families in their community. A waitress who had a beloved customer base. That's what's happening, and she showed large numbers of people turning out.
Yeah.
So there's a double-edged sword here for the Trumpers. I want to say something about how to understand Trump. Not that I think that I have special insight, although I am a social psychologist. I could claim it, but I don't claim that.
Better claim than we do.
There are two sides of Trump, at least, that are not necessarily in total sync with each other. Side one is this guy is a long-standing, well-seasoned criminal. He's a fraudster. He's a con man. And he has brilliantly come back into office to milk the office financially. Yes. Why, in any other moment in history, this would be headline news every single day. How many millions of dollars that crypto scheme that he has? How many millions coming through his various enterprises, hotels and all that from foreign sources? Yes. Which is against the constitutional provision, against emoluments from foreign sources without congressional opinion. That's why I said these are scandals by the day. Well, that's one, if that's his motive, and that is one side of him, and it's that motive is kind of coupled with another personal aggrandizing characteristic of Trump, which is so evident. He is in love with the power itself to have an impact, have an effect on other people, as many as possible.
Yes.
I think, why does he love tariffs? Because he's figured out, or someone helped him figure out, that the president has the unilateral power to jack around the tariffs. And every time he does it, it's causing havoc for large numbers of people in America as well as around the world. The danger there, from his aggrandizing point of view, of course, it could affect the markets, the bond market, and so forth. So he's accused of being a chicken, but and backing away. But what I think he's doing there is more playing with his power. There's not much policy necessarily that he even cares about in terms of that. Maybe he does a little bit, because he'd love.
I think that's right.
I think he'd love to. Part of his glory, power-seeking, aggrandizing. It would be so great for him to get the Nobel Peace Prize. So that's the Trump, without ideology, but with self. He's the world's most powerful narcissist who's ever lived. And he can revel in that. And it will lead to his downfall, but he can revel in it while he's still here.
In the meantime,
Now the other side is much more sinister, which is the fascist side. And I was glad to see that. I think it was David Brooks, one of the New York Times writers, reminded us, and it was another columnist, that Donald's first wife said that he had a copy of Mein Kampf in his bedside table all the time she knew him. And I thought that's pretty interesting. I thought he's more like Mussolini in style, maybe, than Hitler, but still. And so he's always been interested in fascism. I think he believes in fascism in some form or other, whether he wants to say so or not. But Stephen Miller, Stephen Miller's story. This is what I have a little knowledge of him, because he went to Santa Monica High School, where he was voted something like the most hated student in Santa Monica, because he was so offensively contrarian to the prevailing beliefs of the student body, including his own family members. He comes from a Jewish liberal background, and yet he from his adolescence has apparently been really committed to the opposite of everything that his background represents, and I mean that literally. And I think that he's one of those people who make such a big fuss about how great Hungary is as a model. And that's a model that is completely, contrary to anything that we would normally call democracy on purpose. So if they're trying to make Hungary out of the United States, it means that they are trying to abolish whatever understanding we've had of what the Constitution provides and what the processes of democracy are supposed to be in this country. And that's a project that's very sinister, because now they have their hands on all three divisions of the federal government, on the military, and so forth. And I have one other point, since I have the floor.
Of course.
Which is that we had previous examples that were close to this. One was Joe McCarthy. McCarthy was even more outrageously self-serving figure. He was an early figure in the media, and Marshall McLuhan may or may not have written about him, but he certainly was a television personality. But it was at a time when TV news itself was not yet quite the force that it became. So he gathered a big following.
Real quick for our listeners. So McCarthy's trick, you tell me if I'm wrong, Dick, but he would come in he would know where the camera was, and he would make sure that it saw like a briefcase full of files, and those were presumably lists of communists that he.
He started to make speeches in the as a political thing. When he became a senator from Wisconsin, he was looking for a niche. The niche he found was what you just described. That is, that the Truman administration, which was the Democrats, were then in power, and that he knew that there were communists throughout the State Department. He had them in the briefcase. He never produced any of those lists.
Right.
But there was there's a book I would recommend. I just finished reading, called Red Scare, which is a very recent recapping of that whole period, very vividly, well-written stories, and the McCarthy chapter is quite good and quite succinct about this. So that's why I sound like I know what I'm talking about. I did live through that. No, I was in college for a good part of that period, so I was well aware and well immersed in that. In fact, my parents were both victims of that era. They were school teachers in New York, and both lost their jobs because of the witch hunt, as we called it then, of communists in many parts of life. They refused to cooperate with the House Un-American Activities Committee, and so they lost their jobs summarily. They were dedicated teachers in low-income minority schools, and 500 teachers in New York were fired or resigned during that period because of that. Anyway, McCarthy. So McCarthy was brought down. That was the point I started with.
Right.
Eventually, by Republicans in the Senate and by Dwight Eisenhower, who, once he was elected, felt that McCarthy, if they let him run free, he would destroy the country as well as the party.
Right.
So McCarthy was brought down. McCarthyism as a attack on dissent outlasted McCarthy, and he was not necessarily the main perpetrator of a lot of that, but nevertheless, it was a Republican president and allies in the Senate who helped to bring his demise. And
that's right.
The same with Nixon and Watergate. What Nixon was trying in Watergate,
that's right,
was really very subversive of constitutional rights. He had a private gang of people who were interested in, for example, invading the psychiatrist's office of Daniel Ellsberg, who had taken the Pentagon Papers. He was a Defense Department uh, figure who took the Pentagon Papers that revealed so much that was wrong with the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
And Nixon had this gang of plumbers, they called them, who invaded his psychiatrist's office, not to mention the Democratic Party, the opposition party.
Right.
He had invaded their office with these plumbers. And again, it was Republicans on the Senate Investigating Committee of Watergate that helped to bring him down and that supported his impeachment. He resigned before he was actually
convicted. Right?
That's right. Yeah. Back then, it really goes to show just how much more integrity and foresight the Republican Party had. They saw that, like, okay, McCarthy's going too far with this anti-communist crusade, getting too many innocent people wrapped up in it, and of course, with Nixon, like we're a party of law and order. We're not supposed to get wrapped up in this sort of thing. It just seems nowadays this just doesn't seem to be much of a concern by the Republican Party. The only hope we have in reining Trump in, as far as I can see, is just the sheer incompetence of the administration to begin with. Maybe that might work in our favor, or enough senators in the Republican Party take a look at his agenda, especially at this big beautiful bill, and say, no, we're not going to sign off on this. This is too much. Maybe hopefully enough in the House as well, but that's even less likely.
I think the timeline is pretty predictable. I mean, say what you will about the GOP. The GOP knows the timeline of power, and their prerogative is to exercise power when they have it. The Democrats make excuses for why they can't do something, is the opposite side. But
the Stephen Miller and Barrett and those people who we know about who are very ideological and surrounding Trump, their hope is not just to use the power when they have it. They want to abolish the capacity of people to oppose them.
Yes,
that's part of why the troops are sent to LA. It isn't simply about immigration at all. It's about we have the power to send the military in whenever there's protests. We'd love to be able to condemn any protest.
Correct.
Even
if they have to like totally manufacture one and exacerbate something, because this wouldn't have even really happened if ICE wasn't going into these neighborhoods and just snatching people up without basically disappearing people without due process.
There was a poll, at least one, after the election about what people, or maybe it was before the election even, but that's even more importantly is the case. It was before the election. And it asked people of the following possible promises of Trump, which do you think that he would deliver on? And many of the things that they have actually done in office, the majority of people, including people who voted for him, thought he would not actually do. I think that's an important part of what's been happening since.
Right.
You can call it bumbling, but they say, what the Trumpers say is, look, we told you what we're going to do, and now we're doing it. We're fulfilling our promises.
Right.
Well,
Project 2025.
Didn't expect that.
Yeah, and everybody opposed to him, like us, for months on end. Even though we didn't see, I didn't see, the him getting reelected as dangerous of as much of a possibility as in recent recent elections. And so when he actually ended up winning, it's just like I can't stress enough how bad things are going to get, because he's going to be emboldened. He's going to be surrounded by nothing but yes men, unlike his first term. He's going to have obscene amount of power with no checks because the Supreme Court is aligned with him. He's smart enough to not put people in his cabinet that will tell him no and that will have a leash on him. And so it's just a terrifying time that we're in. I wanted to get to a few of the chats here because earlier we were talking about how when it comes to ICE and them raiding these places of work, and especially food processing and agriculture and what have you. Nate chimed in and said it was Omaha, Nebraska that the meatpacking plant was
Okay.
raided, and he also says Trump has had a showing of Les Miserables. I forget how you fucking pronounce that tonight. If you can imagine the irony of that.
Yes.
And yeah, and not to mention, yeah, the Republican Party, they love Orban. That's why they're so obsessed with uh Hungary and whatnot, and not to mention because you made a great point. There, when it comes to ICE being sent into red states, for example, they're going to expect resistance more so than in blue states because they're red states, and so if you have an immigrant workforce and you're relatively pro-Trump and like you're essentially on his good side. So as long as you serve him and have demonstrated that you believe in MAGA and you're behind the MAGA movement and you serve him and whatnot, they're not going to fuck with you because like you need these immigrants, illegal or otherwise, to maintain your business. And so it's easier to go after blue states when, well, these states don't support me anyway because they didn't vote my way. And so it really does come down to narcissism, not to mention just the unhinged racism and insanity
Yeah.
of Stephen Miller and the trigger happiness, for lack of a better term, of the Secretary of Defense, who's looking for any excuse to flex his muscle as well. Not to mention Kristi Noem, the Department of Homeland Security. It's just a gaggle of fascists. Throw in Tom Homan
It's
in there as
fascism.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like, Dick, go ahead, Dick.
What I think is the kind of contradiction, which is a term I guess Karl Marx first used, but it's a very useful analytic term. It means when you're seeing something happen socially, ask yourself, what is the limit of it? You use the term limitation on media. That was a good example of what is the limit of what current, so this particular move that you're looking at, this particular thing that's happening, this particular policy, what is the likely counter reaction? What's the what are the forces that work against it? Don't just settle for the fact that this force is happening. Ask yourself, are there things that are opposing it? Well, one is what we're sort of alluding to, which is the business interest in immigration and in trade, international trade. Those are two examples that is very, very important. And when he threatens Apple with putting enormous tariffs on iPhones because they're made in China, he is. It's ridiculous that he would even say that. I mean, he was willing to go along with preserving TikTok because he probably knew millions of people are TikTok fans.
It's useful.
And now, what if he were to say you're not going to be able to buy iPhones anymore because they're going to cost more than any human being would be willing to spend?
Yeah.
That's not that. You know, that's an extreme example, but there are many. So we have to consider the fact that the powerful force in society that comes from business, international, global, corporate enterprise, but also smaller business, local business. All of those are Republican base in a way. And if they really start demanding cutback or limitation, see that would be something to watch. To what extent he's got he's had the backing of these Silicon Valley
Yes, the tech bros. Yeah.
types, Peter Thiel and Musk and so forth.
Disgusting people.
Frighteningly, Zuckerberg, for example, and maybe Bezos, they're sitting next to him. How long is that going to go on? But they are not the only corporate players in this.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying we should depend on them, but that's a contradiction to what he's trying to do. Another that's very odd for me to bring up, because I've been a target of the FBI in my life, seriously. But now I actually think that the wreckage that is undoubtedly happening because of the people he's appointed to run the FBI and the people that they have fired is bound to be, it's not possible for the FBI rank and file agents and so forth to simply comply with what is going on. People forget now that the FBI agent force is not what it was under J. Edgar Hoover, which was an all-white male, blue-suited group. It's a 40% are women or people of color. 40% of the FBI.
That's right.
And each of the agencies that they have assaulted with such brute force contain people with some power and capacity to figure out ways of resistance. I may eat these words a year from now, but I think that these are things that we ought to pay attention to. And I haven't mentioned the courts because they are ambiguous. We don't know what the full effect of all these lawsuits are going to be. I wouldn't bet completely that the Supreme Court is in Trump's pocket. He's already been upset. Did you notice that he attacked, what's his name? Leo, the head of the Federalist Society. He bitterly, this guy who has enabled Trump to appoint all the right-wing justices.
Yeah.
Why? Well, because they're ruling against him.
Yes, that's right.
The people appointed. Well, that's maybe significant.
Yes.
In terms of what is happening. It means that the Constitution still has some force, that the legitimacy,
thank fuck,
the judiciary is something that they want to protect. But I'm not saying I'm confident of this at all. I'm just saying it's a possibility. And finally, there's what the public opinion polls and special elections are indicating, which is the majority of people are not with Trump in any part of what he is trying to do. The polls are pretty strong about this. So there was an election yesterday in Oklahoma, special election. It was a bluish district in Oklahoma that was carried by Harris. She carried it by 19 points, so it's a pretty blue district. The special election candidate, I think it was for state legislature, or maybe it was a congressional seat. That candidate won the election by 60. They got 69% of the vote.
Wow.
They got 50% more. So that indicates first of all, that some Trump voters probably voted for this candidate, Democrat, but also that a lot of the Trumpers were staying home. And that makes sense if they are disillusioned or unhappy with the direction that the actual Trump administration has taken. I've talked too much.
No, it's all good. I'm looking up what you're talking about. Was it the Alicia Haynes? Is that Timmons?
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
What was that for?
Oklahoma House District 97.
Okay, so it was a House in Oklahoma House.
And there's another one that was Oklahoma House District 71, where Amanda Clinton, who's a Democrat, won 4.7% of the vote.
Yeah.
Damn.
Okay.
Which is amazing for Oklahoma. That's
kind
of crazy.
Ultimately, there is a big shift occurring right now. There are a lot of disenfranchised Trump supporters who they're the kind of people who would not fully sign off on everything that he does. They're like, oh, I like some things he does, and they reluctantly vote for him anyway because just the Democratic Party like they don't like him, which is understandable because they're
No, so you got to
spineless
quantify
politics.
though. But whenever I try to like quantify, and it might be crude, but based on the numbers of election denial from 2020, back when I did that video about who are MAGA and
Mhm.
estimating its size, I theorized that it was at least 50 million voters based on people who were denying the election. So 2/3 of the GOP at the time. I think this last year's election means it's a higher percentage of the GOP, but I don't know the number that would call themselves MAGA. Like I define MAGA as Confederate flag waving, Bible beating gun nuts. That's the cultures I think that interact to create and coalesce to become MAGA. So I think the voters who aren't showing up that you're talking about, Dick, they probably wouldn't call themselves MAGA at this point. They're disillusioned and they're not showing up.
Well,
But
and
there's
some of them are would call themselves independent rather than
right.
Republican. And one thing to sort of dovetail with what you're saying, David, is that something like, it's been estimated, 15 million people who voted for Biden did not vote in 2024.
Right.
Right.
And that is what determined the outcome.
Yeah.
It wasn't Trump gaining support.
Not really.
It
No.
was keeping his base
Yeah.
and probably turning out Trumpers who like the so-called young white male vote.
Yeah, that all those numbers about the shifting, those are all skewed because I think the number was 6.1 million. That Biden got 6.1 million more votes than Kamala did. So I don't think that is it's not the same statistic that you were quoting, but that to me suggested that there was a huge depletion in turnout. So that whole statistic about the younger male voters shifting right, that just means that those are the ones who showed up. Like the youth vote is like the too cool factor. Like the lefty voters, the male lefty voters who like respect a women's right to choose and who understand, I've tried to come up with, I'm part of this new channel called This Space. I'm trying to come up with like shortcuts that people can use in their own social interactions to figure out how open-minded or how just like socially evolved someone is.
Yeah.
And it's like if you're dealing with a man, abortion is the quickest way to figure out if that man is empathetic.
Bingo.
Because
100%.
you can't get pregnant. If you have a fucking
Yes.
opinion on abortion and you're a man,
Yeah.
like you're just not an empathetic person. It's
Yeah.
impossible for
like
you to relate to that.
Tupac
So
had
what
a
do you
Tupac had a song about that on his second album. Like, keep your head up. Like it's just like like be like it's basically like a song dedicated to like empathizing with women and shit. It's just like it's
What's the title of that song?
Keep your head up. Keep your head
Okay.
up is the name of that one. And
so I had one chat that I wanted to make sure I got to.
I got a
Anonymous
couple. I got a
Master of
couple as well.
Society.
Yeah.
But this one's going to segue pretty well. So I've stated before that I think the left should militarize as a means of defense and also protection of the democratic process, as the Republicans and Doge seem poised to rig and gut our electoral system. Yeah, so that's where I think the limits question that you were asking, Dick, that's right now, if for the next, I guess, 15 months or so, it's going to be up to the courts to limit his power because I don't see. I mean, there are a handful of Republican senators and congressmen that might stop him from getting stuff passed, but he's going to throw out executive orders every day
Well, wait 1 second, just to throw complicate what you just said. Look, this big beautiful bill,
right,
is in great trouble in the Senate, and there are more than a handful who are not going to vote for the bill that came out of the House. So where that ends up is going to be pretty tricky for those guys.
Yes,
is to figure out where that's going to go. But the more that bill embodies what it does embody, the more it's kept this way. A tremendous tax benefit to the very rich. It's monumental how much difference the average taxpayer will get. A couple of $100 out of this bill. The average top 1% will get $60,000 out of this.
More than
So that's one. But the other is the attack on Medicaid and other programs that people's lives depend on.
Yes.
And if those are the features of the bill, this is very good news for the Democratic congressional prospect electorally, I would say. But maybe there's going to be a kind of wreckage of the bills altogether. We don't know where this is going. It would be very surprising for you and me if Trump and company themselves had a solution to the dilemma that now is facing the Senate, that they have a plan to get out of this. I mean, maybe they do. I would be amazed if that's the case. So some people are saying what's going on in LA in part is motivated as a distraction.
Yes.
This problem.
Time, yeah.
A lot of people think that. Yeah, I think I'm one of them.
Yeah.
Because I think it's like the cruelty is the point thing. It seems like there's three things going on. There's the fascistic like Gestapo stuff with ICE, and then you've got the actual legislation with the big beautiful bill that's in trouble, and then you've got what the three of us are really worried about, and people who are politically savvy who look 18 months down the road. Are they going to go after the integrity of the elections?
Yeah.
And and what kind of problems are going to come? That's going to be the moment of truth for me. I think we can endure, almost everything else with the problems that I'm glad to see that you. Thank you for mentioning those, Dick, because it shows that there are some people with a conscience still on Capitol Hill. Yeah, and I'm surprised. We might. So the big beautiful bill might get tripped up. The Gestapo stuff that's going to continue. That's just a matter of just surviving and getting through.
Yeah.
And then, but the big thing for me that I've in the back of my mind is like, if he doesn't lose power in Congress in the midterms, then we know that they mess with the elections.
Well, how would you expect that they would? I'm curious what you think the scenarios are that would lead to messing with the election.
At the most, it would be like voter suppression. A clamp down on polling places, especially in red states.
Voter ID stuff.
Yeah. Which happened actually more often than a lot of people talk about during the 2024 election, and it's just a clamp down on mail-in votings, a reduction of polling places, that sort of thing. A lot of people like to point to it just to touch on what Dita was just saying about distractions. A lot of what Trump is doing is also distracting from the fact that like him and Elon had a pretty ugly falling out, and Elon basically coming out and saying the reason that he won't release the Epstein files is because Trump is in them, which was just like this, like
it's probably true.
Yeah, and now Elon Musk is his spine disappeared and he's walking it all back and asking for forgiveness. It's just pathetic. But a lot of people like to point to Elon for having a role in potentially rigging the 2024 election, and I haven't really seen enough like remarkable evidence to indicate that, because a lot of people like to point to Starlink and whatnot, and it's like, if he truly had that power, if that was a possibility, then he wouldn't have lost that Wisconsin Supreme Court seat election as miserably as he did, which he pumped like $25 million into. And I think that's one of the straws that broke the camel's back when it came to his good graces within the Republican Party. So we'll. I don't know how much of
I really found in life after many years of living about trying to deal with political analysis is if you have a conspiracy theory in your mind, and not all conspiracy theories are false. So if you have one in your mind, but you can't, you're having trouble finding any real evidence of it, don't keep going after the evidence, because it's a rabbit hole that becomes really a trap. And even though in one's heart you might believe, sure, he probably did try to rig the election. I mean, he did say Trump wouldn't have been elected without my support, but of course that could simply mean
he's just
effort into it. Yeah.
He's just being bitter because, you know, he is literally so much like Trump. He is a giant crybaby and a narcissist, and he wants to use whatever power of the government to his advantage to enrich himself, to embolden himself, to take credit for this, that, and the other, and he wants to be the man. Like if he doesn't get to be president, he wants to reap the
Well,
benefits
yeah.
of the presidency, like have all these contracts that are worth millions, potentially billions of dollars, so that way his companies benefit, and he just like so he can just reap the rewards of it. Like, just another egomaniac.
Well, not just another. He's the richest
Yeah, that's true.
maniac on the planet.
Yeah, it's never enough. The richest guy on the planet is so miserable. He needs a concoction of like 20 different drugs. It's crazy.
By the way, one hope I have is that the Trump era will bring an end to Americans' deference and admiration for the billionaires. I mean,
Yeah.
believing that they must know something if they get
Right,
that.
they're superhuman, right? Yeah, they're
Right.
so special.
God. Yeah,
So I talked about that on my one of my episodes. I think it was the superficial reasoning or the self-serving superficiality of conservative capitalist cognition.
That's right.
And I talk about how they worship tech billionaires and as if they're superheroes. And I try to say, like, there's a difference between being a master of self-interest, which is what billionaires and successful entrepreneurs and CEOs and other celebrated figures in our capitalist society are. They're masters of self-interest. And then what public servants are supposed to be. Not all politicians are public servants, but all are supposed to be masters of collective interest. And that's why, a lot of people in our circles, I know StatPat is really looking for labor to come out with some talent.
Yeah.
It's like,
God.
we really need some people who understand how to stand up to the for-profit motive as a force to be reckoned with, because it hasn't just ruined the Republican Party, it's ruined the Democratic Party.
It's ruining my current job. Like, honestly, I'm in the pest control industry, and the sales team that we have is just absolutely insane. Like, I know this is like a little bit of a tangent, but these, like, the people that get onto sales teams just to pitch a service of some kind, they promise the moon and the stars, kind of because they have to make that money, they have to make that sell. I serviced a house recently where a guy who clearly had dementia was sold a service, and I couldn't even communicate with this guy, and I just felt so bad. It's because the sales team that we had, fortunately they're all fired now, the team that was but it's just for profit motive. That there's no empathy there. There's no consideration for who you're interacting with. It's just it's the for profit thing that, like, capitalism has us running this little fucking rat race.
I worked in sales for for student loan debt consolidation for a hot minute, and it wasn't even them doing the debt relief. It wasn't a company. It was them telling people about one of Obama's debt relief programs. And so they were collecting a fee for just telling them about the program and then administering the program for them. So sales teams are ruthless.
Well, I was going to make a comment sociologically that the crime rate among billionaires is the highest of any income category. That's important because, we think, oh, well, people with low income. I don't have any data. I don't have data to really prove what I just said, but it's my strong hypothesis. And that's what we're seeing played out in this administration. The most you were mentioning the billionaires with a public interest. Well, the name who comes to mind is the one that's most hated by the right wing, which is George Soros. He does have a public interest in mind. He's deployed a lot of his resources for very good and democratic, small d democratic ends, as well as Democratic Party ends. And he is, of course, considered an agent of some evil demonic force.
Of course.
Yeah, I got a couple of chats I did want to get to from our favorite
Sure.
from our favorite chatter, Megan, who's been a very loyal follower for a long time. She did comment on a few things from earlier.
Uh-huh.
Um, Project 2025, based on Trump policies, with some crazy shit thrown in. Nothing out of the expectations, but it's not like that was the game plan. And I agree. Like a lot of the things we're seeing right now are it's a blueprint. A lot of it really is just following a lot of what's already been laid out and authored by people who had worked for Trump, people who are even in his first term. So I
And
mean,
the poll I cited before about what people believe Trump would actually do, they were asked about Project 2025, and people said no, and the majority said no, he wasn't going to
yeah,
actually implement that, because that's what he said, or that's what he was implying that he was saying, that he
yeah,
never heard of it and stuff like that. Go on.
right,
I'm sorry.
yeah.
No, not at all.
Yeah, and she also brought up a really great point about progressives that were protesting Israel, and that, according to some polls, that was another reason why there just wasn't as much of a turnout, unfortunately, for this election when it came to Harris versus Trump as well. But I mean, it's hindsight is 2020. Hence my hat. Like I totally forgot I was even wearing that for a second. But it, what my the way I approach this, the way I approach electoralism generally is harm reduction. We may not agree like with a whole lot of the way the Democrats approach politics, let alone policy. But in the end, I still believe that they are less harmful than the Republican Party is. Whereas the Republicans like go as extreme as they're um, willing to go and testing the waters as Trump has been doing. Democrats, for all their faults, tend to keep things all in the same place. Nothing that much better, but nothing that much worse.
But that's why I think the secret sauce electorally is primaries, is getting
Hmm.
younger voters to vote. Think about voting twice. You vote twice in even years, guys. Okay. And that's like, don't that I think millennials, which by the way, in terms of generations, are the only ones that are trending in the left direction. Um, are going to show up in just greater numbers. Baby boomers are dying. The pendulum's going to swing back the other way, assuming that the integrity of the elections are maintained. It's just a question of how far it's going to swing back the other way. Because if it's Gavin Newsom that's riding that pendulum, then my hopes and dreams are going to have to be delayed by another decade of
Uh,
incompetence. Dick, what else? What else you want to talk about, Dick? What's on your mind?
Well, it's what you just said prompted me to say some things that
Great.
kind of playing off what you're saying. First of all, I'm as old as I'm fucking old, so I can say it. I'm 87 years old now, which I would never believe was possible, and I'm in good shape.
yeah,
My brain's working beautifully. So I, on
good.
one hand, don't like the way in which it is assumed that once you're a certain age and you have trouble walking, that you're no longer intellectually competent. I don't
I
like
agree with
that
that.
formulation, but
Yeah.
it is absolutely clear to me that there's a large number of young rising people that are outstanding prospects for leadership in
Hmm.
their communities, in the state, and in the nation, that need the older folk who now
Get out of
run
the
the
way.
Democratic Party nationally have to get out of that way.
Did you see the so we talked about it on Monday night. Did you hear about the audio leak with Ken Martin and David Hogg? Ken Martin is the chair of the DNC.
Yeah. So what
David
happened?
Hogg was the
I'm
vice.
not sure. Not sure I
So
did hear.
David Hogg was vice chair and trying to
Yeah.
raise
No.
money to primary people. Yeah. And so Ken Martin, long story short, Ken Martin spends a minute like just pussyfooting around the point, finally makes the point, which is basically, you cut my legs out from underneath me. I'm trying to make a name for myself and
Hmm.
accumulate power within this institution, and you cut my legs out from underneath me. And then he starts crying. Then he starts crying, like, yeah. He starts crying. It's like he's like, Gene, it's on you. I'm like, oh my god, you could not have picked a worse person
leader
to be the face of this party
of the DNC.
I mean, it's like, so that's I was talking about it on my on this space earlier today, the double-edged sword of equality, which because the left is obsessed with equality, and I want an equal opportunity society. It's my dream. Right? Yeah. Equal opportunity society, because some people do work harder than others, yada, yada, yada. We all want healthcare. We all want right to a home, right to, it's a decent, safe living space and all that stuff. But the establishment left, the enlightened, quote, centrists, they are obsessed with the method by which we achieve success. And it's actually the left's narcissism, where they think that equality is the way to political victory. And that's not actually true. Like, diversity is great. I'm all for a diverse portfolio of political athletes. That's great. But they all have to be athletes. They all have to be competitors. Give me politicians with a chip on their shoulder and something to prove. Like, there's, the young and hungry athlete is going to work harder than the established person who's been, saying all the right things for 20 years. And it's what the country wants, generational change. Like, actually, so Dick, you're actually silent generation because you're older than my dad, and my dad is silent generation. So you're off the hook. So, because
you're in the clear.
I was born before the baby boom.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. So you're silent generation. You guys are off the hook. Yeah. It's really the baby boomer generation, man. Their generation of conservatives who were sociopathic, and the liberals who were too weak to stop the sociopaths from coming to power. That's the story.
I'll make a professional comment. And I've written a lot about generational issues, but I don't think you can't talk about a single characteristic of a generation. Each generation, quote unquote, that we label has multiple different strands within it, and that,
of course,
and it's often forgotten. But the thing about all I'm trying to get across now is that there is you take a look at this New York mayor's race. There's a young guy, Mamdani, who came out. I mean, no one had heard of him. He's now second in the rank ordering of candidates in the polls, but it's between Cuomo, who is totally discredited as a human being, let alone a politician, but whose name recognition and whose safeness, I guess, gives him an edge in a campaign where probably most New Yorkers haven't been paying that much attention anyway. But the thing about Mamdani, in relation to what you were saying before, he seems to have thrilled a lot of the younger voters throughout the city. There's a lot of grassroots campaigning for him, and it may be a big surprise that he comes in as the lead candidate. I put it that way because they have this rank order voting now.
Rank choice voting, that's right. Yeah.
Rank choice voting, yep.
That will actually play out when push comes to shove.
I have faith. I have faith.
Yeah, we're hoping he pulls off the upset.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great. That would be a great telltale sign. I mean, this is, it's a reactionary voting public. Like, we got Jimmy Carter because we had Dick Nixon, right? Like, it's, people are going to want the opposite of Trump. I think when all is said and done, they just want people who are. That's just my only concern. My biggest concern is that MAGA long term will only be an intellectual verdict on the alt-right, not conservatism as a whole. And that's the title of our episode here, The Devolution of Reaganism into Trumpism. For those you tell me if you disagree, Dick, because you know more about the history of American politics than I do. I believe that what we live in now, this fascism that we're experiencing, right? This MAGA fascism is a natural result of conservative capitalism devolving over time since really the economics of it started in 1980.
Well, I have I don't disagree with what you just said, but let's add something to that I guess this is my function here, is to complicate or add to context. Well, the context is this. Go back in history, and we realize there were people who slaughtered the Indians.
Sure.
There were people who actually enslaved other people, and were happy to go out in lynch mobs and celebrate the lynching and distribute postcard photographs of the lynching. And
Yes.
so, in
And
other
take
words,
dates to the limp. Take
we
dates to the lynching.
have
Yes.
this dark tradition that can't be. We should not keep overlooking it. We should face it. That part of the American story is that part of our population that is white supremacist,
Yes.
and that has lived that in one way or another, and who feels threatened and angry when that seems to be going away or being challenged. And Trump, in that sense, MAGA is a continuation of this long history. Well,
Yeah.
Father Coughlin was a Catholic priest. This is back to the Marshall McLuhan thing we started with. The
Sure.
radio in the early 30s was the big media breakthrough. And this priest in Detroit, who Father Coughlin, got a radio weekly, I guess, show. I guess it was weekly, maybe it was even more frequent. He had 20 or 25 million listeners. He was outright anti-Semite, and he preached favorability to fascism in Europe. And he was on there at the same time that FDR became president of the United States and so forth. So the Ku Klux Klan, it had Klan chapters all over America, including the Midwestern states in the
Sure.
1920s. So we have a history of very active white supremacist and racist politics that Trump brilliantly has figured out how to play with and make use of in ways that again have to do with his media persona and what that meant to people who, when he announced that he ran for president and stuff
Right.
like that,
Yeah.
brought him that kind of influence, I guess.
Mhm.
And so that's part of the context that I would say. So what is it in late capitalism, as you put it, or what did you say, declining capitalism?
It's late stage
Same
capitalism,
thing, yeah,
but
pretty much.
I define it as baby boomer conservative capitalism is
Yeah,
what I would
okay.
actually define.
Well, it's about globalization
Mhm.
and its painful effects within this country that neither party was able to face or address. That's part of what has come back to affect the electorate, like the electoral base of the Democrats.
Yeah.
And it's also on the good side, you might say, on our political side, the so to speak radicalization. The other effect of the precarious economy is the creation of precarious living conditions for a lot of young people, whether they've been to college or not, in
Right.
this generation. That's the generation you alluded to. They are to the left of where the Democratic Party leadership is, and
Right.
they were deliberately ignored in the Harris campaign. They were
Yes.
deliberately walked away from those people. And those, I know personally, people in their 20s who said, I'm just not going to vote this time.
Yeah.
And it's okay, they said, because we're in California. She'll win California anyway. But
Right.
that attitude
Yeah.
was more pervasive. It wasn't just in blue areas, but it was strongly in blue areas among younger voters. So
Correct.
that's a good news, because I think there is room. Sanders shows this, and Warren shows this, and AOC shows huge crowds for AOC and Sanders a few weeks ago out there in red state areas. I'm not. I think if we can, this stuff, if we can get some of these people out of the way that we're talking about and let them realize, I retired because I thought younger people should be taking over, and because I could comfortably retire but they can comfortably retire. I'm looking for Schumer. Chuck Schumer could be a leader in changing the Democratic Party and therefore give him a great new legacy. How can he be a
Right.
leader? He can step aside for the next race for Senate, let AOC run in his place. That would be so great.
Yes.
Wouldn't you think? All right, send him a letter. Make that.
Yeah, but I don't think when is he up for re-election?
I think it's soon.
Next year, yeah. If I
Is it
remember
next
correctly,
year?
Either next year or 2028. It might be 2028.
One of those
Yeah,
two.
like, and that's the thing.
She'll be quite ready for that by then.
At least you, Professor, you have the you have the knowledge, the wherewithal, and the foresight to understand. Okay, it's time for me to step aside. Let the youth take more take my place. I wish a lot of Congress and Senate felt the same way, because we have representatives who are staying in their position basically until they die. Like, there are medical professionals on staff who tend to uh, congressmen and senators who have revealed, you know, some of these representatives, we literally prescribe uh, medicines and what have you for dementia or Alzheimer's. Like, the representatives are too old to be there, and they're too stubborn, unfortunately, as well, to stand aside and let younger people take their place. Like, so it's going to be a fight with Schumer. So
Well, we got
if
a
it
lot of
means
time.
forcing him, yeah,
we have some time to,
Well, I
to
mean,
see if
actually,
things change for him.
the reason I have even some hope for Schumer on this particular way that I phrase is because when Biden was elected, or even before that, Schumer started to embrace a lot of the Sanders and Warren program, and I thought that was interesting because he's always been thought of more as, Mr. Wall Street,
Yes.
senator from Wall Street.
yeah,
And yet he really went to the left in his policy. I think more to the left than Biden was willing to go.
of course.
Well, maybe because if I were in his shoes, I could feel like I'm in his shoes because I'm that age or much older. Why not go out in glory? Go out as the person who helped change the direction of the country by letting the door open for the new generations of leadership that are out there. It's not like there's a vacuum.
Yeah.
It's said
because
that
he's owned by special interests because of what you just said. He's owned by
Right.
Wall Street. Wall Street. It's like Wall Street would be cool with that as long as they get to pick the next successor.
Well, yeah, but that doesn't mean they will get to pick it. But
No, I know, but Schumer's. You got to remember the power.
But he's a human being who has his own legacy.
Well, actually, that's where I was about to go.
Yeah.
Is the power and privilege that he's had for as long as he's had it actually has probably robbed him of his humanity.
Oh,
I actually think, I think it distorts people psychologically. Look at Trump; he's gotten even worse since when he was, on The Apprentice. Like, and he's older or whatever, and probably has dementia. But the fact that Pelosi hasn't gotten out of the way by now, or even talked about like the next generation, like where was the grooming?
Right.
Where was, we're the party of the attractive people, supposedly. We got Hollywood, right? Like, where's the bench? Where's the talent? And I think people got complacent after W because they were like, oh, wow, the Republican Party's so bad. It's never going to come back. It's never going to recover from those miserable 8 years. And then, Trump shows up in 2016 and proves us all wrong by pulling an inside straight, and probably wouldn't have happened without Comey. But I liken what's going on to America right now with an alcoholic or a drug addict going through a relapse. And our addiction is, in a general sense, greed. But to get specific and politically practical with the label of what I just said, it's baby boomer conservative capitalism. It's a specific type of capitalism. I joke with stateless patriot. I'm like, theoretically, there could have been a version of capitalism that would have maybe worked, that we could be living in right now. had we paid our bills and invested in education and
And it
put
would have been under Bernie Sanders.
yeah, or someone
absolutely.
even or someone even bigger than him, or
Yeah.
or Jerry Brown beats Bill Clinton in the primaries in 1992, and we're living in a
God,
completely different America.
Yeah, that would have been great too.
Like but I think if you Dick, to my source of hope is that we're resilient as a nation. We do have a lot of tough areas, especially the leaders, these next generation leaders that we're talking about, I think are going to come from these areas. And it's going to be a kind of a blanket rejection of conservatism from now on. It's like, okay, we've been wrong since 1980 about the relationship between the government and the citizen. We had it right 100%. In the FDR years. And there's the political marketing thing that drives me nuts is we actually have a Reagan with FDR. Like, that's why Stat Pat and I talk about it all the time. That's the genius. That's the real genius. Imagine doing it for the first time. Imagine having to come up with the New Deal on your own.
Right.
And so we'll see the next generation of political stars happen. Like, I'd love to see Schumer have some grace and think about because when you die, your reputation becomes your legacy.
Exactly.
So, but he's not thinking like, I don't know if he's thinking like that.
Well, I've lived my life by being sort of naive and hopeful, and so, but I don't actually think he's the key to everything. I just think that it would be
Nobody could set an example. He could set an example, and that could be a domino effect, and other people would get out of the way too, and it'd be great. Well, anyway, we've had you for an hour and 15. I think we've had a ton of great content.
Well, I've enjoyed this a lot. And is this then become a recording? Is it available?
It'll be posted.
Yeah, it's already posted on. As soon as we're done recording, it's available on my channel. Let me know if you have any problems finding it, and I can send you a link to it.
Send me a link because I didn't get a chance to send this link to people live, but I certainly would hope. In fact, I should say that I do a podcast, not a YouTube, but an audio, with Daraka Larimer Hall, who's one of our up and coming leaders in this community. He's former vice chair of the Democratic Party of California, and a sociologist too. And it's called Talking Strategy, Making History, and it has probably a good deal of similarity to the kind of things you're trying to do here. And in terms of the issues, but so that's one thing. I also have a radio show for 40. This is the 43rd year. I'm entering the 43rd year of this show on KCSB here in Santa Barbara, California. If people are, it's called The Culture of Protest. It's a music show, political music more than anything else. It's about culture and social change, culture and social movements. And for example, this program tomorrow night, it's on Thursdays at 4 p.m. Pacific time at www.kcsb.org. But I'm now pre-recording it, so I can send people a link to the show so they don't have to tune it into the radio. So they can reach me at rflacks@gmail.com. And if you're interested in this, tomorrow I have a program, an hour of songs relating to the No Kings demonstration. It's a soundtrack for the protest. I collect anti-Trump songs in particular nowadays, and I've tapped into that. So anyway, this is what keeps me young and fresh.
Nice. That's awesome. You stay busy.
Keep doing your thing. It'll keep you young and fresh.
Thank you for joining us today, Dick. We really appreciate it. And I'm going to follow up with you about Daraka, because depending on where he lives, I might want him to run for an office I have in mind.
All right, David.
Take care. Good to talk to you.
Thank you, Stat Pat.
Of course. Thank you, Professor. It's been a great show. Really appreciate it.
I had a great time. Thank you.
Of course.
Pretty awesome, huh?
What
a great show.
Man, a living legend, honestly. Like he's
he's walked the walk and he's talked the talk, and the fact that he's 87, he's actually older. He's looking down. He's looking
Crazy.
down. He's looking down on the boomers, dude.
Uh-huh.
He's looking down and saying, "You motherfuckers, like you didn't listen to our parents and
Yeah.
learn from the greatest generation about being custodians of American government and society, so
Mhm.
that the next generation will have a better society than the one you grew up in." And
Right.
that's the sociopathy of the baby boomer generation. I mean, look, he's a professor, so he's always going to want to make sure we're being intellectually responsible and not treating things like monoliths. But
Yeah.
I'm sorry, like a very small percentage of the baby boomer generation is intellectually redeemable to me. A very
Yeah,
small percentage.
which is totally fair. Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, it's just like if you weren't anti-democratic party starting when Bill Clinton, you know, did the things that he did with the Telecom Act, repealing Glass-Steagall, all the things I've talked about before. If you weren't like kind of paying attention and kind of got a clue, like, wait a second, why are we getting away from this being the party of FDR and becoming the party of Clinton?
Yeah.
Then, you haven't gotten there yet. You need to get there on your own. Like
Yeah.
you need to figure out what the transition point was for this party and in our lifetimes. And that's when it was.
Yeah.
That's really when it was. But what else you got? Do you have anything else? Or I mean, this has been a great show. I
Yeah.
don't want to spoil it by trying to bleed it out too much, but Connor the Progressive American is here.
Yeah.
Photo
I
rap
saw
music
that.
person.
Really
Yep,
appreciate
saw
him
that
joining.
one.
Isn't he coming through next week?
He is. He's coming through a week from today.
Oh, sweet. Yeah,
Um,
that's right.
and we've got Olivia Hope on Monday at 7 Pacific. For all of
Excellent.
those of you interested, she's going to be talking. She's a fabulously intelligent woman and understands men really well, and has a lot to say and knows a lot of data about the male loneliness epidemic. And I won't spoil. There's one particular piece of insight that she has that I'm going to hold on to for the show. But it's consistent with simplicity is the essence of genius. I'll leave it
Right.
at that in terms of how to fix the male loneliness epidemic, which is something that doesn't
Oh,
get enough
yeah.
press.
That's actually something I've wanted this podcast, this show, to expand a bit more on because it's because it's such a pressing issue, and it's so pervasive. I think it's something that we could probably benefit from covering a bit more and
Yeah,
whatnot.
definitely. Definitely. Absolutely. I mean, I'm sure a lot of our audience is, lonely males.
Yeah, of
Um,
course.
all right. Well, for Stat Pat Stateless Patriot, I am Dieter Big McBusiness, American Wasp. We are reminding you that you don't get change in America by asking nicely.
Thank you, everybody, for joining in. We'll see you Monday.
And I'm out.
Alrighty. Monday still sounds good for you?
Monday's great, man. I love this guest stream that we're on is great. Like it
They're fun.
I think it's so much better than you and I. I mean, like than you and I just talking about the news and just kind of saying the same things over and over again. Like, repetition is important for sure. But
hmm
I no, that's with the shareable link. I'm just emailing Richard a link right now.
Yeah, Megan was asking about where else he does the podcast other than KCSB.
Oh, yeah, let me get into the description and I'll put it in there. No, it's not made for kids. No, that's not what I wanted to do.